Parashat Vayera, the Pharaoh in us. The story of the 10 plagues of Egypt can be read as one reads a novel or watches a movie as a simple external viewer, having nothing to do with the story. Pharaoh's rebellious behavior against the will of Yahuwah may even upset us as we read this passage from the Bible. However, it is useful to analyze this story from another angle as well, because very interesting things can be revealed to us concerning our own person. For me, this passage is always a warning as to whether there is still something pharaonic in me or not. Is there anything in my soul and mind that prevents me from evolving on my path of disciple and advancing in spirit to serve Yahuwah out of Egypt? Because although I have already came out after my conversion and my rebirth, there are still things remaining that should be cleared away. It would be a shame to simply see Pharaoh as an ancient ruler having no effect in the present and in our lives. In this case, we would lose the possibility that Yahuwah would continue to unmask and judge the presence and actions of alien spirits still stuck inside of us. The main characteristic of Pharaoh is that he panics and seems to submit himself at the sight of the plagues. Then, when the storm has passed, he hardened his heart again. This is a typically human characteristic, and few of us are free from that. We often bow down before Yahuwah when problems come. Our humility and the number of our prayers increases with the number of plagues. But as soon as the storm has passed, we return to our little jobs as if nothing had happened. We experience these stages during our conversion. Everything is turning into blood in our lives. All sorts of parasites and diseases are surrounding and threatening us. We have the feeling that everything collapses around us. And then comes the death of the firstborn. The death of our own person, our ego as the firstborn. This self-love that puts our own person before everything, our main idol, which is ourselves, and which must die to finally give way to our new man, born again in the Messiah. Nevertheless, this process continues and must continue as sanctification goes on in our minds. As born-again disciples in the Messiah, there is plenty of things to settle in us, so that all the current idols, the actual firstborn, continue to die in order to make room for the Messiah in all segments of our being. Now let's take a look of how does this pharaonic spirit work in us. Pharaoh, however, continues to work in spirit and does not wish to see his subjects escape from his power. Although he cannot resist the power of Yeshua, who has the power to bring many out of Egypt, he runs after them in order to accompany them in their journey of discipleship and sow traps to make them fall if it were possible. We see this spirit operating within the Jewish people when they revolted against Moses and asked for things from Egypt, such as food, or even outright asked Moses to bring them back there. I know many people who have been filled with the Holy Spirit and who, following their rebirth, continue to encourage in one way or another, or even outright practice things that are normally incompatible with the Spirit of the Messiah who dwells in them. I'm not talking here only about the usual temptations such as money, power, and women, which are visibly rotting the church in a very ugly way these days. But I do not understand, for example, how it is possible to continue to invoke the Father by the names of ancient pagan deities such as Theos, Dios, God, Jesus, etc., as I explain in my article Eternal Names, while speaking in tongues, and this by the Spirit. Likewise, how is it possible to prophesy about a new year according to a pagan so-called Gregorian calendar, sometimes even under a decorated Christmas tree? How can someone who has been born again for some time and who normally should be mature and adult in spirit still celebrate or simply wish Merry Christmas to his brothers still stuck in their pagan childishness, instead of pointing out to them with love and passions that it would be better to abandon these things of childhood and grow up a little? I can give my own testimony to encourage those who have been discouraged by the many false charismatic manifestations seen throughout the world. I myself received from the Father that Yahuwah is His name through speaking in tongues. And that comes out from my mouth not in the usual speech that one can hear from people who pronounce the same 2 or 3 syllables indefinitely and for years, but rather a speech of a volume and a variety which, if I would write it down on paper, would occupy a volume equivalent to a novel. And all this, at least in 4 or 5 languages very distinct from each other. And naturally all this not in public for everyone to hear, but in private, because as long as there is no one to translate it, it must remain exclusively between him and me. But all the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, kas, and other babbles, worthy of infants, are at most acceptable only at the beginning, just like when a small child begins to learn his mother tongue, when a few sounds first come out from his mouth, then syllables to result in an increasingly complex speech so that he can be understood by those around him. For what do we take the tongues of angels? For vulgar dialects, which are more primitive than ours? The linguistic level of the disciples indeed deeply reveals their state and their spiritual age. The poverty of their speaking in tongues is only the mirror of their incapacity or their refusal to want to advance on the path of sanctification and become adults in spirit. And this is precisely the phenomenon that keeps many believers who take their faith more seriously but are not filled with the Spirit from taking the plunge, because they do not understand what this whole circus is, and they even lose the desire to be born again. And for these ones, I invite them to do the same as the Israeli army is currently doing. Go in and take back all the spiritual gifts that have been taken hostage from the hands of those who hold them captive, like the Israeli hostages held in Gaza. Do not let them discourage you, for these gifts are promise and they belong to us all. And then, once you get them, go back and show them how it actually has to work. Because not all strange phenomena are demonic, and most of the weird phenomena of languages are not false, but simply stuck at a primitive and childish level because of the rebellion of those who cultivate them. Let us not fall in the error of calling false what is not false, but where the problem is different, because we could also sadden Ruach HaKodesh as these ones are doing, even if we do not want to. The sign of such a blockage in infantilism is in fact also when we distribute Merry Christmases, just to maintain good relations with these brothers and sisters who still have one foot in Egypt or Babylon, instead of finally go and extricate them like these hostages from Gaza. But let the judgment of these phenomena be in the hands of Yahushua. The magicians of Egypt. Let's come back to the story of the Torah, because it is remarkable to see that up to a certain point, the magicians of Egypt are able to reproduce the same miracles as those which Yahuwah accomplished through Moses and Aaron. They turn sticks into snakes, water into blood, produce frogs, all kinds of insects and parasites, and so on. Many theories and explanations have emerged about the methods they used to carry out their imitations. I do not want to dwell on these details, because there are indeed scientific and other less scientific explanations for these things. It is indeed possible to hypnotize snakes until they become straight and stiff as sticks, then to throw them on the ground in order to wake them up. Aaron's staff was although not made of a hypnotized snake, but of dry wood, it still turned to be a snake, moreover, a snake capable of swallowing others. Larger miracles, on the other hand, are more suspect and more certainly imply a spiritual intervention coming from the supernatural power. Of course, for some wonders, it is hardly thinkable that magic tricks or scientific phenomena are sufficient to generate them. Satan and his army have received some power and they use it from time to time. This is most certainly what they did then, and they will do so soon to deceive many according to the end-time prophecies. See more concerning this subject in my video called I've Seen Some Enrapturing UFOs. But what is more interesting to us is to observe that Pharaoh hardens his heart when he sees his men doing the same miracles as the Elohim of Israel. Simple men seem to have the same power as the Almighty. Pharaoh witnesses the miracles of Yahuwah and is reassured when he sees his own men do the same. We often hear men preaching on the subject of the 10 plagues of Egypt by giving scientific explanations to the phenomena described. For example, how water is transformed into blood. Because there would be an algae or bacteria that starts to swarm in the water of the Nile from time to time, giving it a reddish color and exterminating any form of life around it. As a result, the remains of the river's fauna raise massively to the surface of the water, favoring the proliferation of toads and frogs and other parasites that spread diseases. They managed to explain the whole process of the 10 plagues with rational and scientific arguments that were certainly generated by the will of the Almighty, but that are certainly not that extraordinary. Well, these lukewarm, sneaky Bible teachers emphasize that we should not take everything literally. Bacteria or algae may well arise. It is also one of the potential explanations of the power of the magicians, but the Bible tells us that all waters have turned into blood. Yahuwah said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone." It is obvious that the Almighty is able of causing considerable damage just by swarming the bacteria in the waters of the river so that its color turns red. But here it is, however, a question of real blood, because the bacteria does not appear like that in wooden or stone recipients. Elohim can use the force of nature since everything is His creation. However, it is dangerous to want to convince unbelievers by bending to their rules in order to catch their attention. By wanting too much to involve human sciences in the teachings of the Word, we risk unwittingly to play the role of Pharaoh's magicians. Indeed, pharaohs are eager to get rational and palpable responses emerge in order to neutralize and cancel the signs and judgments given by Yahuwah. Under Pharaoh, you have to understand that I'm speaking about the unbelievers and the spirit of the Pharaoh who hardened their hearts. Because Pharaoh's heart did not always harden at the sight of the disappearance of the wonders. If we take a look closer, we see that in most cases, it was indeed at the sight of the power of his own magicians to imitate or explain the wonders that he persisted in rejecting obedience to Yahuwah. It is therefore very important to walk with open eyes and pay attention to discoveries that prove that, for example, the Red Sea split into two at some point. For indeed, scientists have discovered skeletons of horses and men, as well as the remains of chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea, and are unable to explain how they got there. They don't know because they don't want to know. And in the same way, let us pay attention to and disclose the research results of these believing scientists, who are collectively known as creationist scientists, because they have achieved very relevant results that can be measured and observed with the scientific tools of the world today, and which, without exception, are proving the truth of the biblical accounts concerning the creation, the age, and even the shape and physical characteristics of the earth. So be brave and bold, because remember that heaven does not belong to the meek, the lukewarm, and the diplomats, but to the violent ones.